MiniWarGaming's The World Engine.
Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and it's time for another story time for our World Engine 40K narrative campaign. So, if you haven't yet watched the first part that was published last Thursday, there are going to be spoilers in this one, so you have been warned. If you don't want the spoilers, then go back and watch those right now before you watch this, because I am going to recap what happened in the last two missions. So, what happened? Well, we had Davicus, Master of the Forge, leading a very large assault strike into the heart of the Necrons, trying to basically wedge his way right into the Tomb World. And in the meantime, the Terminator Captain Antaro of the First Company was leading a smaller force, but very elite, into a less guarded area of the Tomb World. And they were hoping that between the two of them that they would be able to get in there and be able to start searching for whatever it was that was causing this big hole in the warp, or the pra, as we have been tongue-in-cheek calling it. And so basically, both of them didn't succeed in their missions. Davicus, with his forces, got overwhelmed by the Necrons. It was strange, though. It was just strange because the Necrons almost seemed prepared for them. It's just where they hit, they shouldn't have been as well organized and well defending. Necrons, even for Necrons, they were just too well organized. And Overlord Khepri, being one of the major overlords in this dynasty, was right out front, right where the Space Marines were landing. And at first, Davicus thought maybe he was just relegated to it, or who knows what, but it just seems too coincidental. And on top of that, the Necrons didn't even try to kill all of the Space Marines. They were actually just trying to disable them and incapacitate them so that they could take them prisoner. And in fact, when Davicus was taken down by Overlord Khepri, he was wounded, but Khepri stopped from actually killing him and instead took him prisoner along with all the survivors of his attack. In the meantime, Captain Antaro and his group started going in the side entrance. They weren't as well prepared, but they just weren't expecting the resistance from all the flayed ones and the scarabs. They were just acting with too much ferocity, and it just overwhelmed them a little too much, and they had to do a tactical withdrawal. But thankfully, they didn't take too many casualties. They lost a few Terminators, which is a big deal, and a few of their Assault Marines, but they managed to grab their wounded and pull out of there before they took very many more casualties. They just weren't able to quite push through those defenses. And so as he pulled back, he sent word back to Chief Librarian Matthias about what happened, and actually about Davicus being captured as well, because he got word from them as they were doing their fight, and they stayed in communication through the whole thing. And so Matthias, of course, he's in a bit of a bind, because he can't just send a ton more Space Marines, because he needs to keep a garrison force on the world, because there's constant demon attacks on their world in the warp. And so if he leaves too many, they could lose the world, which they always get pulled back to, and it just would be the end of their chapter altogether if the demons were able to take over that world completely. So instead, he sends a few more Space Marine not companies, but squads, but he also sends the Imperial Guard that he's had just recently join him from our last campaign in the Storms of Ixia, of course, as they traveled through the warp with Menadius to meet up with the Space Marine chapter. And there might even be a certain Commissar who he sends to make sure that they're very effective in their battles, as he's heard many tales of renown for this guy, but you'll have to wait to see that in the next mission. So meanwhile, Davicus regains consciousness in a Necron stasis cell. He looks around him, and he sees that there are many other Space Marines in similar cells, some of them clearly dead, in fact in pieces, and some of them just unconscious, or they appear to be unconscious like he was. And as he looks around in this large room, he sees in the center of the room this very strange cryptek-looking being who is currently dissecting one of the Space Marines. And it's very strange because most crypteks are humanoid. They have 2 legs and 2 arms, but this one has 4 legs and all sorts of limbs and instruments coming out of him. And its face is kind of like a cryptek, but it's a little longer and it's a little more ornate. And so he's not quite sure who that is or what it is. But as it's making a precise cut, all of a sudden the power flickers, and there's a temporary power outage, and then it comes back, and he sees that the guy, this being, this cryptek thing, actually missed its cut because of that. And however the Necrons do it, it curses in his mechanical voice. But it looks up and it notices Davicus is stirring, and it leaves its work and comes over to him. And as it looks up at him, it says, "Don't worry, Space Marine, your turn will be next." But before it can move away, a nearby door opens, and who should walk in but Overlord Khepri, flanked by a few Lich Guard as his honor guard. And he doesn't seem too pleased. he motions to the cryptek and speaks. Szeras, our Pharaon is very interested in these subjects for his upcoming banquet. As hard as it is to read Necron emotion, Davicus thinks that he can detect a certain amount of disgust from Khepri as he speaks of his Pharaon. How much longer do you think it will take for you to finish your work? This work cannot be rushed, replies Szeras, who you might recognize from the Necron Codex. Tell your Pharaon that if he wants my services to continue his enhancements, then he will allow me to work undisturbed. In the meantime, if your master cannot control the power source in this tomb world, then he may lose my services altogether. Without a further word, Khepri storms out with a slight hint of anger in his mechanical movements as Szeras returns to his work. Szeras is obviously annoyed, even for a mechanical creature, and Davicus sees this and he lets out a little bit of a snicker. But Szeras casually turns around, presses a button, and all of a sudden he feels this big jolt of energy go through him, which renders him unconscious again. Later on, Davicus awakes again, but strangely enough, he's no longer in his stasis cell. He's lying on the ground in front of it. And as he begins to regain consciousness, he can hear others shuffling around him. He looks around and sees other Space Marines have fallen out of their stasis cells and are kind of starting to awaken as well. And he notices that the power seems to be flickering even more. And sure enough, when he looks back at his stasis cell, he can see that it's having trouble retaining enough power, which must have been the reason why he fell out. So as he gets up, he looks around and he sees that there is still more of the Space Marines trapped in their cells, but that they're having a harder time keeping enough power. He quickly moves over to them and starts to pry at whatever parts he can find, and sure enough is able to start freeing them, which normally would have been really hard because these stasis cells are very, very high tech as they're millions of years old. But he's able to pull out some parts or rip off another, what looks like a conduit, because there's not enough power going through them, it actually disables them. So he quickly frees whatever Space Marines that he can find. And after he frees a bunch, they go to a console in the room and they start to access it. And he's somewhat familiar with the Necron protocols, not very much though. He's in his few searches for technology as he's left the warp over the past thousands of years. There have been times where they come across Necrons, so he's not totally unfamiliar with them, but it's still a completely alien interface. And so he's able to get some information. For example, he is able to find that there's this, where he is located is in a series of stasis areas, and that there are more Marines nearby. And he also finds that he can access the bit of the power grid. He sees that there are issues with the power grid all over the tomb world. And specifically, he finds what he's been looking for this whole time, which is he sees what is causing the hole in the warp, or this big, the shadow in the warp. And that is what he realizes is a null field matrix. And so what a null field matrix is, it's something that the Necrons employ to protect their tomb worlds from psychic invasions, whether it be demonic, or whether it be psychers, or whatever happens to be, because they're totally bereft of psychers and any ability to access the warp or its powers. So and that includes being able to block themselves from it. So they have to use this null field matrix. And so he's not able to pinpoint where the main generator is. So he still needs to be able to find that, but he is able to see where the series of network of these pylons all over the tomb world, some of them on the surface, that are projecting this field around the entire thing. And so as they move around, he is able to regain contact with Captain Antaro, who informs him that there are more reinforcements coming in, that they're preparing to do a rescue mission to come and get him. But instead he gives them other orders, and he tells them of a nearby pylon in the null field matrix, that if he can access it, it might have the information. If he can, and because they actually finds out that there's a tech marine coming to join them, if the tech marine can access it and get the information necessary, he might be able to pinpoint the location of this null field generator, which of course is their main objective in this entire campaign. That's what they're trying to get back to the planet in the warp, if they're able to do that. So he orders them to do that. And then, as they're looking around, before the sentries are totally aware of all these Space Marines becoming free, because it seems that they're all preoccupied with other problems right now. This tomb world, at least in the area that he is in, seems to not be working the way it should be working. And he actually locates all their weapons that had been taken from them into another room, and he's able to rearm, to a certain effect, his men, so that they can get ready to continue on. But as he continues to look through it, he realizes that if he can actually disrupt their power grid a little bit more, it can seriously disable some of their defenses. Maybe the null field matrix won't have enough power to actually be able to sustain itself, and they'll be able to bring in even more reinforcements, including Chief Librarian Matthias, because right now he's avoiding going there because it'll just wreak havoc on his psyker abilities. And so he locates through the console once again a nearby generator room that he thinks that if he goes in there and disables those generators, that it might provide that power fluctuation that'll just tip the balance in their favor. And so he takes what few survivors there are and heads that way. In the meantime, the main Pharaoh, Overlord Knum, is displeased with how this is all going. He's displeased with the fact that this tomb world is taking much longer to get operational than what he actually wanted before. And on top of that, he sees the mounting Space Marine threat, not the one inside, but the one being led by the Terminator captain, Antaro, and the reinforcements that are arriving from who knows where. They just seem to be flickering out of the warp and coming, but it just seems so strange. He's never encountered something like this where Space Marines, not Chaos or demons, are coming out of the warp and actually reinforcing their troops. And so he personally leads a counter-assault force to try and combat these forces that are arriving before they can do too much damage and disrupt his plans any further. And so we have our two missions today. The very first mission is going to be Davicus's forces, so it's going to be a smaller one, about 800 or 900 points, where they're trying to capture the generator room. And our second mission, we're going to have a larger game out on the outside of the tomb world, where Overlord Knum is going to lead a large force of 2,000 points of guys against a Space Marine and Imperial Guard allied force of 2,000 points. And it just might have Lord Commissar Cruchef there as well. And that one will be in the vault. Both links are in the video description below. The first one's for free, and the second one's for the vault members only. If you're not a vault member, we encourage you to try it out. You can try a free 7-day trial by just clicking on it, and you can sign up and get instant access. If you don't like it, you can cancel. And even if you accidentally renew, you have a 30-day full money-back guarantee, but we think you're going to like it. In fact, the majority of people who sign up for the free trial end up keeping it because there's just so much stuff in there. Not just the extra missions, but more battle reports, painting tutorials, behind the scenes, and so much other stuff. And it helps support us. It is what keeps the lights on and allows us to employ our employees to make battle reports. So thank you, Vault members, for being such a great support. And thank you, anybody who decides to sign up for the Vault today as well. So go ahead, check out the missions, and happy working.